Good evening, it's Jenny. Today's topic is, why do the Japanese love Zen design? The reason why I came up with that is because I was talking to my sister today, and she read an article about a designer who was into Rococo design, and it's kind of fancy European style. And he said, the times have changed with the internet. People's aesthetic has changed. And because everything is so busy, when people are at home, they want something very calm and peaceful. And it kind of brought some ideas into my thinking. And then I thought about it, and I said, that's very true. When I grew up in Japan, and then I went to different countries, and then I've been in the United States now for the last 20 years. And I went back to Japan many years later after I left Japan. And I forgot how it was when you ride a train. And when you ride a train, there's a lot of advertisements all along the train and hanging. There's, and even in the streets, in the subways, there's just, posters everywhere. There's just a lot of people. And because I lived in the countryside in the United States, I kind of forgot what that feeling was like. And I got information overload because I wasn't used to so much advertisements coming at me at one time. And by the end of the day, after we were in the subway, in the department stores, and walking down the streets, as tourists, I was there with a school group, I was exhausted. And I thought, I know why I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted because there's too much stimulation, overstimulation. And I thought, why didn't I feel that way when I was younger, when I was growing up in Japan? And the reason why I didn't, and I figured that out, is because basically, if you live with it and you grow up with it, you don't see it anymore. It's part of the background. But then when you are taken out of that environment and then put into a new environment that doesn't have that kind of noise, visual noise, I call it, and then you get used to that. You get used to trees and just, simple buildings and houses. And then you get dumped back into the big metropolis of Tokyo. It's like, information overload. I can't handle this. And so it was just too much. And then because I wasn't used to it, I saw everything. But if you live there, you can block it out. And because that's how the human works. It's like if you live next to a railroad track, and the train goes by every day, after a while, you don't hear the train. But if you've never lived next to the train tracks and you live next to it, you hear every single train in the beginning. But after you live there for a long period of time, you don't hear it anymore. We become extremely used to things. And then, for some reason, our bodies and our minds adapt. We don't notice them anymore. And that's really true. We moved to Kuwait, and we live near a mosque. And the mosque has prayers, I don't know how many times a day now, I forgot, several times a day with the loudspeakers. And in the beginning, I thought I was going to go crazy because early in the morning and then in the midday and evening, it's on loud speakers. Everywhere you live everybody lives near a mosque, right? And I thought, oh my goodness, how can you go through this every single day? But it's funny, after you live there maybe 6 months, you don't hear it anymore. It's gone. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. So It's amazing how we get used to things. Now, I wanted to talk about, what am I going to talk about? The Zen aesthetic. So, what is the Zen aesthetic? What is Zen design? Well, we think of Zen design as very horizontal, peaceful, and clean lines, very simple, no patterns. And if you're talking about a door, it's usually kind of a flat door, usually natural materials. But today we have all kinds of materials, but it doesn't have very much decoration on it. A lot of times, like the handles of a cabinet could be built in, so you don't see any handles. They carve maybe something instead. So Zen design is very simple, easy design. Now in feng shui, we analyze in form school even the country. And how do we analyze a country? We don't just look at a country and say, oh, that's this kind of country, that country. We look at, what do we look at? We look at the landscape. So when we look at the landscape of Japan, it's kind of shaped in an opposite L, right? And it consists of 4 islands. And if you look at the topography of the Japanese islands, it's very mountainous. There's lots and lots of mountains. And the real livable space is kind of like on the edges of the island, not so much in the center, because there's just a lot of mountains. And people don't understand that Japan is such a mountainous country. It's beautiful, but a lot of the land is not livable. And because of that, there's a lot of contrast, a lot of mountain and not very much flat land. And in fact, only maybe about 30% of the land is livable. Maybe 15% they said is agriculture, and the other 15% is where people can actually live. So it's very limited space. And because of that, there's a lot of contrast. And because there's a lot of contrast, there's a lot of contrast in society. So for example, if you go out in public, there's a lot of people, a lot of shops. Everything is very, what would you say, dense, and they're used to smaller spaces. So it's a very dense place in the cities. And because you have such density, I think the counter reaction to that is when you go home, you want something serene and calm with not much in the room. So the other day I was reading an article about Kim Kardashian, and her house is like very neutral, all white walls, like a church. It's just very simple. A lot of her things in her house have a very neutral palette. It's like no color. And the reason is because they have so much external stimulation in their work life that their home life, they crave for the opposite. And that is very common amongst designers. They, if you've noticed, many designers only wear black or only wear white, or they wear black and white. And the reason is because every day they're touching fabric, they're looking at colors, and so they need that balance. And so they crave that neutral kind of, empty space with just white, because their work requires so much stimulation. Now, I have a client who is in the dental industry, and same thing. A lot of stress, a lot of concentration, a lot of things he has to focus on. So what he wants to create in his own home is kind of a serene, calm, relaxing place where he can unwind and just rejuvenate himself. So it depends on your profession, on what kind of environment you crave. Now, yesterday I talked about minimalism and maximalism. Well, I think I kind of got it. Well, this is just my theory. I'm just thinking about it. The reason why I think people are going to maximalism is because they're not able to leave the house. So usually when you leave the house, you can go to the mall, you can go shopping, you can travel, you get a lot of external stimulation. But all of a sudden you can't leave the house, you're just in your home. So where do you get your stimulation? There isn't anywhere except inside. So instead of keeping a very calm house, you want that extra stimulation. And so you want to put in more stuff in your house. So I get it. However, some people say, see, everybody's different, that you get so much stimulation from the internet that when you turn it off, they want something calm. So I think it just depends on your personality too. For myself, I prefer the really simple, and I don't know if it's because of how I was raised or if it's because of my profession. It's just something that I feel very comfortable and relaxed. A lot of wood. And those are the kind of things that give, I think, a space character. So I think the reason why Japanese people really like that calmness is because of all the stimulation. If you go to Japan, it's crowded. I mean, it's really crowded. But you get used to it. It's really amazing. I think about it when I was younger and I used to take the train. And if you've seen videos on YouTube, you know, when you're commuting, they literally push into the train, and you are like sardines inside. I mean, they squeeze you. And when I was young, I didn't think twice about it. I would stand there and then they start pushing and you just go like this and you get squeezed in, and then they keep pushing and pushing and you could barely breathe. But somehow you just stay really still and they push you with their nice white gloves and then the door closes and you don't breathe very well and you just hold your breath kind of until you get to the next stop, and then everybody just pours out of the train. And then another group of people come in and then they push and push. And then you repeat that until you get to your station. But it's funny. It doesn't bother you when I think you mentally block a lot of things because it's just what you have to do to get to work. You know, it's just normal. But then now living here, and then I've left Japan in the 90s. So that's a long time ago. So I think if I go back, I don't know if I could go in the rush hour again. I might get claustrophobic because I'm not used to that anymore. I used to be used to it, but I think now that you're so far removed from that, it's hard to go back. But I think if you do it for like 6 months every day, you'll get used to it again. But I don't know. I think that's a hard one to get used to, being pushed inside a train like sardines. And I was thinking about that at one point, and I thought, it's kind of a strange feeling if you think about it, because you think, well, you're next to people you don't know. You're very close. Your whole body is touching somebody else's body. And then if you think about it, you start to freak out. And you think, oh my gosh, so it's better not to think about those kind of things when you're in the train. So anyway, kind of went off topic, but the reason why we want to have a calm, serene environment is because the other things in our life is very chaotic. And we always crave for the opposite because it's just like the pendulum, you know? If you have extreme, you want the other. So when you have a very crowded interior, you know, maybe your outside is really serene. So it doesn't bother you. You can have a lot of stuff. You can go maximalism because you go outside and there's nothing. It's like peace and calm, you know? Yeah. So for example, if you lived in a desert, maybe you want the stimulation in your house because the desert is, you know, very full. Well, it depends what kind of desert. But, you know, there's not much vegetation. There's a lot of sky, a lot of earth, and that's calming in itself. So maybe when you go into your home, you don't need that calm Zen look. Maybe you crave the opposite. You want something ornate. You want something, you know, with a lot of detail and carving. In fact, that's true when, you know, I lived in the Middle East. A lot of their furniture is very, they like the gold and the Louis the 14th kind of look. And I think that comes because the contrast of their environment. It's very simple, it's very beige, so you crave the opposite, the color, and the ornaments, and it's very beautiful. So maybe that's how we get our own aesthetic. Maybe we crave the opposite. Something to think about. Just something to think about. Well, seems like nobody's on today. Everybody's busy. That's fine. I said I would be here till 9, but since nobody's here, I kind of finished my story. So maybe that's all for today. Tomorrow I should be on with Justin. If you have any questions, please post on Facebook. I'll try and write a bit more. I haven't been writing. And if you enjoyed this video, please check out my Indiegogo campaign for my book, How to Find a Good Feng Shui House. Talk about the origins of feng shui. We talk about the difference between cultural practices and actual feng shui principles. And of course, the 4 simple steps to how to find a good feng shui house. So if you enjoyed this, I'm sure you enjoyed the book. So please go and get your book at Indiegogo, How to Find a Good Feng Shui House. Well, thanks for watching. Have a good evening. Bye. I should say good night.